Welcome back to the show today, everybody. I'm here with my friend Ken Rupert at kenrupert.com. And let me share a little bit of information about Ken before we start talking about relationships and how his advice is going to help you in the relationships that you have. Ken has written several books on relationships, spiritual development, planning, strategic thinking. He takes care of his special needs son. His father has Alzheimer's. And he is uniquely qualified to address issues that maybe you haven't thought about in the past. He has over 30 years of experience in this. So I think that the conversation that we're going to have today is going to open up your eyes to maybe look at some people in your own life in a little unique way. Now, the big theme today is about how we tend to view people in certain lights, in certain ways, and how maybe if we rethink just a little bit about how people view us and the relationships we have with people, that maybe relationships can blossom in a big way. So, Ken, I'd like you to kind of jump into that, because I think many people try to wing relationships, and winging relationships never works.
No.
So
As
how
a matter
can
of fact, a relationship that is winged typically is an acquaintance.
Well said.
Right. So there's three basic concepts that go into building a relationship. And the three basic concepts are time, experiences, and purpose. If you take any one of those three out of the equation, you really have an acquaintance. You really don't have a relationship. In time, you have to have a quantifiable and qualifiable measure of time. So you have to spend time, a lot of time with somebody, and you also have to have quality time. So that time has to mean something. We go to work every day and we spend time with people, but because there's not that element of quality to that time, we don't really have relationships at work. We have more acquaintances.
Very true.
The shared experiences are important in a relationship in both a positive sense and a negative sense. As a matter of fact, relationships that are forged in difficulty are some of the strongest bonds that are ever created.
Very true.
And so we have to understand that in the process of spending that time with people, we also have to have experiences. We also have to have a shared experience, and that will create a bond. And the third aspect is purpose. You absolutely have to have a common purpose. You see many marriages fall apart today because the purpose that each one of the people brought into the relationship ends up being different. And then they're pursuing their own desires or their own dreams, and they're not working together. And one of the best places to start that in a marriage is by bringing the finances together, because when you have combined finances, you have communication, because you have to talk about it. You have trust, because you are trusting the other person with whatever financial resources you're bringing into the marriage. And so that's a common purpose.
Wow.
So those three elements are key to really building solid relationships.
What would you say about families and relationships where each party has baggage that they bring into the relationship, whether it's past hurts, relationships that have fallen apart, opinions about certain things? How would you recommend that couples meander their way, or a better way to say it is to plan their way, plan their relationship better, knowing that each party has issues?
Yeah. Well, there is no getting away from issues, right?
Right.
If you're human, you're going to have issues.
Right.
But I think the important thing is there's a commitment, okay? Sometimes that commitment's to the other person. The person you marry is the person you're committed to. But then there's times where that lacks. And that's where you have to be more committed to the concept of marriage, what it really is all about. And you have to build the trust back, or you have to build the confidence back in that relationship. And I think that if you have a commitment to the person, and you have a commitment to the concept of marriage and what that really stands for, then I think it's easy to work through some of those issues. You may never solve all the problems. As a matter of fact, I would suggest you're not going to solve all the problems. But if you truly love the person, right, you're going to have patience. You're going to be long-suffering. You're going to be forgiving. You're going to be understanding that this person is a unique person. They're going to do things a little differently than the way you would. And it's not wrong, it's just different. And you have to be willing to give and take in that. Understand that the same flaws you see in your partner, are probably the same flaws they see in you.
Wow. Ouch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that one kind of hurts.
Talk about how servanthood in a relationship can magnify the good times in the relationship versus having a relationship where it's all about me and what I want and what I need.
Yeah. So selfishness really never gets you anywhere.
Right.
Being a parent of a special needs child, I think this is a point that a lot of people don't fully understand unless you've kind of like been there. But you are basically a servant of the child. When they have physical and cognitive difficulties, it's your job as the parent to ensure that they're safe, that they're well provided for, and even further on past your lifestyle, right? Like, I'm not really saving for my retirement. I'm really saving for my son's retirement. So I have to plan 40 years beyond my death, really. And I think that you understand that the whole process is if Daniel is struggling with something, I can't get inside his mind and his world to understand it. So I have to provide him an environment that is conducive to his comfort. And you only really can do that through servanthood. Being a parent of a special needs child really takes away the selfishness. Because there are so many times that I just don't want to do it.
Right.
But I realize that it's important because at that moment is a moment where we can actually connect and strengthen our relationship.
Now, that kind of bleeds over into this word called empathy. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to invest some time talking about how empathy and relationships, in whether it's a parent-child relationship or a husband-wife relationship or girlfriend-boyfriend or sibling relationship, or even a coworker relationship, how empathy can literally change the landscape of every interaction that you and I have and everybody else has in their life.
So empathy is, the secret is all in the definition, right? Sympathy comes from the root of, which is the root of son, which means to feel with, to kind of sit back and look at somebody else's position and say, I can understand that person feeling that way. But empathy is about feeling into somebody else's pain. And when you really think about it, the model for empathy is very simple. You have to set aside your own priorities. You have to enter into the world of somebody who is struggling. And then you have to walk with that person through the difficult times using a program that I've kind of developed called MENS, which is mentoring, encouraging, nurturing, and strengthening. And that's my purpose within that relationship. And I can walk that person back to wholeness. Now, we're not going to solve every problem. Right. As a matter of fact, just because you're working with somebody doesn't mean that they're going to come to wholeness because of your efforts. It really is a process of just being willing to be there when they need you, to be there when they're hurting, to be there even when it's inconvenient for you. That's what empathy is all about. So you really do have to set aside your own priorities. You have to say that when this person calls me, it's most important that I'm with that person at that moment because they need me. And if that means that I have to adjust my schedule, then I just adjust my schedule. And certainly with a child who has special needs, you really do have to do that. You really do have to set aside your own priorities. And as I said, I can't get into his mind, but I can walk alongside of him. You know, my son suffers from anxieties. And there are times where we'll go over something 3 and 4 times a day, sometimes 30 times a day, and it's anxieties that are irrational. He's afraid that when it rains, the power is going to go out. Now, the power doesn't go out every time it rains. Right. But when a thunderstorm comes up, he has panic attacks. And so it's taking the time to say, you know what, I'd much rather be doing this, but it's important that I sit with him and I walk him through it and I talk him through it and I calm his fears and I encourage him and I nurture him at those times. So empathy is, if I'm hearing you correctly, is there's no room for I in empathy. Absolutely. Because empathy is literally about somebody else. Mm-hmm. So if coworkers, wherever the person's employed, if they were to implement empathy
into the workplace, or if the managers or the people who ran the corporations would encourage people to have an attitude of empathy, how do you think that could change the culture of an employer?
Well, let's face it, when you are expressing empathy in the way that I've described it to people, that person feels like they're the most important person in the world at that moment. And that produces within somebody a desire to then be better, especially when you're walking through the process of mentoring and encouraging and nurturing and strengthening. Those four aspects in the dynamics of empathy build coworkers up. And when you build somebody up, they want to produce. It's a natural byproduct of what you're doing. And so, yes, if we take the cold corporate culture and we infuse it with empathy, I think what we would find is that people would feel as if they're important and they understand their place and they become more productive on that.
So if we extend that same example to a household, where there's a dynamic going on in everybody's household because of personality styles and baggage that we all carry into our families, how much better would a household run if the people in the household lived a life that had empathy in the relationships within the household? What does that look like?
What is that dynamic?
Right.
How does it change? Okay.
Right.
Well, obviously, it says to the spouse, you're more important. I'm going to set aside my priority to ensure an environment in which you can flourish, right? And both spouses will be saying that to each other. And so there'll be room within there. There'll be an extra measure of patience when one is not feeling well, whether it be something stressing them out. My wife and I often talk about my spirit feels kind of pressed on right now because there's something bugging me and I'm not quite sure what it is. Well, it allows room to say that, you know what, I wanted to go do this, but I sense that you could use me as a sounding board, or you need somebody to talk to. So it sets aside a priority. Certainly with children in today's world, they have got an incredible amount of stress coming at them. With peer pressure, I mean, we had peer pressure growing up, but the peer pressure today is different. There's a different dynamic to it.
Right.
And I think that, I often say that we kind of grow up in our parents' generation. What I mean by that is our parents grew up in their parents' generation. They were affected by the things that their parents were affected by.
Right.
And I think the key to understanding that is that the world is changing at such a rapid pace that you can't keep applying the knowledge that you've gained from what you grew up and applied in the same way. You have to be creative about it, and you certainly have to set aside time and talk with your children. One of the biggest problems we have is we're so busy as a society. Two parents are working, or in the worst case scenario, you have a single parent family, and there's not that communication. Daniel, my son, loves to connect with me. He loves me to come in and sit with him. Sometimes it's just come in and sit and watch what I'm doing on the computer. He doesn't want to say a word. And that presence, he just knows Dad's there. But during that time, I don't just sit there and watch him play on his computer. I start asking him questions. And that's one of the ways that you can use empathy is I want to feel into his world. I want to understand what he's experiencing, when he's experiencing it, what that makes him feel on an emotional level. And then maybe I can help him with giving him some intellectual tools that will help him deal with an anxiety or something else that he's struggling with.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there's no room for me, in quotes, if I want my relationships, to be productive. That is, there's no room to have you as top dog in the relationship if you want the relationship to blossom. Is that correct?
Yes, and if both people in the relationship are giving each other that level of priority.
Exactly.
Now, we're not talking about getting stagnated on, what do you want to do tonight? I don't know. What do you want to do tonight? That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is saying, I'm sensitive enough, I'm empathetic enough to see that my spouse, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my child is struggling with something. And they may not come out and say it. But when you're in a relationship, you can sense it. You will know because you've given that person a priority. And when they express it through either their body language or their verbal language, that's when you set aside the me. And you say, okay, it's you time now. We're going to talk and work and get through this, and we may not solve it today. It may be an ongoing process, but you know what? I'm patient and I'm committed, and I'm going to be here for you, and I'm always going to be trying to feel into what you're experiencing.
So if we extend that same example over to money, because money can make a relationship, it can break a relationship, and I've seen it. I know you have too. Where you have one person that is what I call a spendthrift. They love spending money. It makes them feel good. It gives them a high. And then you have another person in the same relationship that is, I'll call them tight, or they're a saver versus a spender. That's a more polite way to say it. How can you bring that philosophy into that dynamic? Because that can be really heated. Because you have that spendthrift that wants to go out and have fun, and they're not concerned about retirement. They're not concerned about tomorrow. They're not concerned about the mortgage payment or having enough money to buy the food. They just want to go have fun. And then the other side of the table, they're stressing out because they know that the money's going on silly things that isn't going to help them long term. How can we get through that? Because I know that happens a lot.
And that is a major problem. A lot of marriages break up because of money fights. And the interesting thing is, I've been called the nerdiest free spirit you'll ever find.
Okay.
I'm the spender in the family. I definitely enjoy, if I've earned the money, I definitely enjoy spending it, and whether it be experiences or the latest and greatest gadget, I do like to spend. My wife, extremely conservative fiscally. Always had a savings account, always had an emergency fund. Me, I was changing debt from one credit card to another because it was just the best way to go for me.
Yikes.
So we got married, and it didn't take me long to understand the value of her. And she could run a budget much better than I could. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with that. Because why create a fight over something where you know the person is better at something than you are?
I agree completely.
So it's learning each other's strengths. Now, about 5 or 6 years after we got married, my wife came to me and said, I think we should start investing. Now, outside of a 401k, I was really not a big investing person. But what I've found over the years was that investing is a lot like spending. I get to buy stocks. I get to buy something. So I get my fix for buying, but at the same time, I'm building wealth. And over the years, I've put together several books on wealth building and strategies.
Right.
Because for me, you can have a goal, but if you don't have a strategy on how you're going to achieve that goal, you're really never going to get there, right? Because a goal is the goal is the target. Right? It's what you do to get to the goal that's important. And that's where I started realizing my strength as a strategist, and my strength as, you can take what seems to be a negative thing, a spender, and actually turn them into a productive individual by getting them to spend the money on the right things.
So it's really a reframe.
Exactly.
On how you perceive, in this example, spending.
Exactly.
Now, something that comes into play with these situations is ego and pride. Because in some relationships, there are some people who think that they have to have all the answers because they're either the husband or they're the wife. And there's baggage that comes with that because of stereotyping, because of, my mom did it this way, so that's the way I'm going to do it here. And it comes from both sides. Mm-hmm. Now, when that comes into a marriage, it can destroy the marriage pretty quickly. So how do you deal with ego, whether it's intentional or non-intentional, and how should it be addressed?
That's a really good question, because I think ego is going to kind of infuse the whole marriage. It's not just going to be on money, right? It's going to be on everything. Like you say, I have to have the answers for everything. When you can honestly look at yourself, and I always say, identify your drivers. Understand why you're doing what you're doing. If you understand why you're doing it, then you can change the behavior. If I'm doing something and I'm unaware of it, and my wife makes me aware that I'm doing a certain behavior, my first question shouldn't be, why do you say that about me? My first question should be, if that's true, why am I doing that? What is the method behind my madness? Mm-hmm. And I think that when we start to become introspective in those areas where we know we have a character flaw,
right,
we can really start addressing them. Now, there are still things that you're going to do. There's still things that my wife is going to do. There's still things that each couple, each person in the relationship is going to do.
Right, it's true.
And you have to have grace. If you don't have grace in a relationship, you've pretty much just damned the relationship.
That's totally true.
So I think that being introspective gives you the ability to say, okay, I'm going to step back, I'm going to take a breath, and I'm going to try to determine what is it about this behavior I have to do? What is driving that? You start to understand your drivers, and then I'll challenge you even more. Then go to your spouse and tell them, I've been thinking about this, and I think I'm doing it because of this, and I want you to help me. Wow. And that will change your relationship right there.
Because then that puts the other person above you. You're taking the servant role.
Yes.
That's powerful.
You're putting yourself in a position of saying, I'm willing to step back, I'm willing to deflate the pride, take care of that ego, and say, the reason why I married you wasn't so I could be right. The reason why I married you is so you can better me. And the reason why hopefully you married me is because we are going to better each other in this process. If you're always seeking your own betterment and never seeking the other person's betterment, you've pretty much just destroyed the relationship. And it's only a matter of time. And we don't often see these things when we're dating. Right. When we're dating, everything's flowers and rainbows and everything's nice.
Very true.
But then you get married, and the very things that you thought was cute while you were dating becomes the very things that start tearing you apart. Wow. And you got to be cognizant of that.
Now, you used a word a few minutes ago that we don't use culturally too much, and that word is grace. In Christianity, that word is thrown around and used all the time. But invest a little time on that word grace and how grace, after you share what that means, how that can literally take a relationship that's at each other's heads all the time, always fighting, always having a difficult relationship, and turn it into something that's beautiful.
Okay, so I'm going to try to give you an acronym. Okay? Give room and change everything. Grace. Give room and change everything.
I like that.
You have to learn to give each other room in the relationship. That means room to make mistakes. That means room to maybe behave in a certain way that at that moment you just need to get it out. You need to vent, right? So if you give room and change everything, you're basically doing exactly what grace is. And I think that in Christian circles it would follow the same way, right? God gave room and changed everything. And I think that's that would be my focus, is learning how to give each other in the relationship room to actually be who they are.
So relationships will blossom, not can blossom, but they will blossom when we're constantly looking out for the other person before we look out for ourselves. Serving the other person, extending grace, extending forgiveness, extending compassion to the other person in lieu of waiting for them to have the light bulb go off and realize that, which may never happen, by the way. So when you and I put ourselves beneath the people around us, whether it's the boss at your work, if that boss is a leader and not just a boss, he will surrender his title, if you will, to serving the people around him or her, which creates an environment of grace, which creates relationships that blossom instead of implode. Is that correct?
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when it comes to the corporate world, real quick, just want to take a look at this. A supervisor, a leader who is okay with his or her people knowing more than he or she does, can produce more than he or she can, when they're okay with that, they understand that those people who are going to be empowered through this expression of grace will actually make them look good. They don't have to sit back and try to make themselves look good.
Yep.
That's why people work for, bosses and supervisors. This is the key. The boss has responsibility.
Right.
They have accountability.
Right.
But it's the people that get it done.
Right.
And it behooves the boss to empower the people.
Right.
To encourage the people.
Agreed.
To be empathetic where the people are. Meeting the people where they are and then leading them to greatness.
That's powerful stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to change the world right there.
So a last thought for a minute or two, Max, about how empathy, how relationship, how forgiveness, how grace can blossom a relationship.
Well, you have to take your eyes off of you, is really what it comes down to. I mean, it's as simple as that, but it's as hard as that, right? It's a difficult thing to do because, from very young age all the way up, we're taught me, mine, mine. I mean, we don't have to even be taught that, right? We pretty much are born that way. And so I think the key is take your eyes off of you, put them on somebody else, enter into their world. Like I said, set aside your priorities, enter into their experience, and walk alongside of them. This is a journey. This isn't a moment in time. It's not a picture. It's literally a movie. And that movie is going to last until your last breath. And in this case, it can actually go beyond that. And it's what you do today that's going to make tomorrow different.
Great advice. If you want more information on Ken, go to kenrupert.com. Ken has boatloads of information that can help you in every area of your life. My name's John Carver, and thank you for watching.